Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We have apart from our audience here, we also have a number of colleagues online. My name is Dylan Alain, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this year's William Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture, hosted jointly by the Office of the Vice Chancellor and Salises Mona. Our keynote speaker this evening is Professor Mark Figueroa, who is
recording in progress.
Do I have to repeat this? Who is a distinguished Lewis scholar. I wish to recognize both online and here Professor Justin Robinson. He is online. He's PVC and Principal, Five Islands Campus. And he's the Vice Chancellor's representative. Professor Denzel Williams, I don't know if he's here as yet, PVC Principal, Mona Campus. Professor Lloyd Waller, Director of Salises Mona. Professor Don Marshall, who is online. I don't know if he's there as yet. University Director Salises. And Dr. Heather Ricketts, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Mona. I also see in the audience colleagues I haven't seen for a long time, Professor Trevor Monroe. Let's proceed. We now turn to opening remarks by Professor Justin Robinson. He's online. Are we ready with him? Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Master Chairman. And I will adopt the protocol that you have already established. Although I must give a special shout out to the guest speaker, my brethren, Mark, who I haven't seen in eons. You've abandoned us. So good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, friends. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to this important public lecture hosted by the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, Salises, at the Mona campus. This evening, we gather to explore a topic that speaks to the heart of our region's development aspirations. Lessons for the Caribbean from China's successes along a Lewis path. This discussion is especially timely as Caribbean nations navigate an increasingly complex global landscape. Like many small and developing regions, the Caribbean faces persistent challenges: economic inequality, a limited economic diversification, and vulnerability to external shocks. Yet within these challenges lie immense opportunities to harness our creativity, human capital, and regional cooperation to achieve sustainable growth. It is fitting that this dialogue seeks to draw inspiration from Sir Arthur Lewis, a Nobel laureate and one of the Caribbean's greatest minds. His dual sector economic model remains a cornerstone of development economics. China's remarkable journey over the past 4 decades demonstrates the relevance of Lewis's theories in action. By prioritizing rural reforms, leveraging surplus labor, fostering strategic state-led investments, and embracing technology and trade, China has lifted over 800 million people out of poverty. These successes hold valuable lessons for the Caribbean, not as a roadmap for replication, but as an invitation to adapt principles that align with our unique cultural, economic, and geographic realities. Let us remember that Sir Arthur Lewis urged us to look beyond our immediate challenges to envision a future of shared prosperity. He believed in the Caribbean's potential to rise above limitations and to craft development solutions rooted in our collective strengths. Let us approach tonight's lecture with open minds and a spirit of inquiry, eager to learn and adapt lessons that can inspire the Caribbean's next chapter of transformation. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, I thank you for being here and contributing to this critical conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. I don't know if Professor Williams is here. Is he all right? Okay, we'll move on. We now hear further greetings from Professor Don Marshall, who's the University Director of Salises.
Greetings. I will wish to observe protocol and ask that we observe that this has been read out. And welcome to yet another installment of public engagement by one of our esteemed colleagues. And I'm going to speak about Mark in the present tense because it was only in December last year that Professor Figueroa would have contacted myself and another colleague, a number of us colleagues participating in a forum where we were discussing the contribution of Arthur Lewis's work at the University of Manchester. They held a 70th anniversary conference noting the work of Arthur Lewis, particularly a 1954 paper. And Professor Figueroa would have shared with some of the colleagues aspects of what he will do tonight. And we were fascinated with the paper. And during the time I was there, at the time that another colleague was there from UWI, we marveled at the fact that Mark's name kept being repeated, and the paper, his insights from that paper were also picked up by a number of the scholars working within the framework within which Mark was, the neoclassical framework within which Mark was issuing a critique, and also showing the ways in which China has managed to overcome some limitations within their classical assumptions. So I look forward to the presentation that would come tonight, as I was disappointed that he couldn't join us in Manchester last December. And to my brethren, I want to wish you well, and I continue to enjoy your intellectual acumen and the fact that you're willing to share with so many different publics. Welcome again, Professor Figueroa, and thank you for thank you for indulging me at this point.
Thanks, Don. We now have greetings from Professor Lloyd Waller, who is the Director of Salises.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and all protocols observed. I would like to particularly thank the Dean, outside of the protocols that were established earlier, the Dean and Dr. Heather Ricketts and PVC Sandria Maynard, who is also the Executive Director for the IC Institute for, remember the name, International School for Development Justice. It's funny because I remember contributing to the name about 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. Today we find ourselves in a very unique situation. The world itself has become extremely complex, more complex than many persons could even realize. Between mRNA technology and artificial intelligence, specifically generative artificial intelligence, every sector in every part of the world has been advanced at least 30%, 30 years into the future. We are now at a particular accelerated space in humanity that is filled with a lot of anxiety, a lot of tensions, a lot of apprehension, and a lot of hope. But there's also a lot of fear, as many persons find themselves not understanding this complex world that we live in. And beyond the complexity, and interestingly so, we had a conversation with Professor Mark Figueroa, and it was quite interesting that we were able to identify a number of factors that Sir Arthur Lewis's work represent today. I mean, and I listed some of them here from our conversations, Mark, so I hope I'm not giving you a lecture. I mean, his emphasis on education and training is actually vital for the ongoing advances in AI. And as a matter of fact, investments in training and capacity building in AI is something that many persons are doing. I just today registered to do a 6-month course at Johns Hopkins University, a certificate in artificial intelligence. And what I'm going to be using it for, and a lot of the reasons why they decided, because you had to apply and then you were shortlisted and do an interview process, but they were extremely interested in the application of generative AI in terms of development studies. And you can actually see the link between Lewis's work and generative AI. I mean, even mRNA, his work on his insights as it relates to the labor market and having a good, healthy system, economic system, is actually the basis for some elements of mRNA health technology, health development, and development itself. So there are many different value propositions that we can identify as it relates to the relevance of Lewis's work today. And I am very happy that Mark, more so than anyone else, who has been doing a lot of work on Lewis's work and who has been for some time doing work on economic development using Lewis's model, is here today to give the lecture. So welcome everyone and thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the insights. Mark, I had 8 other things to say, but based on the conversation we just had a while ago telepathically, I've decided not to say it. So thank you everyone for coming. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's now my pleasure to ask to the podium Dr. Heather Ricketts, colleague of mine, and I think Mark was dean as well for 8 or so years. It's very interesting. To introduce our speaker, Heather.
Pursued an academic career at the UWI, where he served for 43 years in various capacities in the Faculty of Social Sciences, the last of which was as dean. His wide-ranging research interests have included transformations in gender and socioeconomic outcomes, focusing on the different experiences of females and males in education, health, and leadership. Also, Jamaica's political system, the political economy of violence and the garrison phenomenon, and the Caribbean economic theory and policy. The consummate Lewis scholar, he has produced more than a dozen papers on the work of Lewis and continues to conduct research on Caribbean economic ideas. His last 2 publications appear in Solis's journal, Social and Economic Studies. The first of these, 2019, provides a detailed discussion of Lewis's policy prescriptions for the Caribbean. The second, in 2022, reintroduces Ida Graves, a Barbadian economist who predated Arthur Lewis and who Professor Figueroa asserts, quote, deserves to be acknowledged for her contributions to the critical tradition in Caribbean economic thought, having presented ideas that were later adopted by her successors, including Lewis, and members of the Caribbean radical and plantation schools, end quote. Last November, Professor Figueroa completed a paper titled Arthur Lewis's Political Economic Perspective and Asia's Economic Resurgence Explained, one which he plans to publish very shortly, and we look forward to this edition. So, with that established, I invite my colleague and the person who predated me as Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Professor Mark Figueroa.
Good evening. What I really want to speak about is the way forward for the Caribbean, but I need to give credence to my suggestions. As a result, I frame my suggestions in terms of lessons from the way in which the most successful transition in human history, economically, reflects the thinking of Arthur Lewis, who was the Caribbean's most successful political economist. This evening, I dedicate my lecture in memory of Stanford Moore, who died 1 month ago. He was an exceptional UWI colleague and a special friend to me and my family. He was not a one for long talking, but I have to record that he was one of the greats on whose shoulders so many of us stand. Although I focus on China, there is a wider context of Asia within the global economy. Going back 200 years, China and India were the two largest economies in the world. Going forward 25 years, China and India are projected once again to hold that position. The brilliance of Arthur Lewis is that within the racist context of the 1950s early, when India and China were at close to their lowest point, if not at their lowest point, Lewis foresaw the possibility of this future. In 1955, Lewis noted, Japan has been able to double its output every 25 years and suggested the rest of Asia could do the same. More than this, Lewis set out a path which is very much like the path that Asian countries, including South Korea and Singapore, followed to achieve rapid development. I start my presentation by indicating the different principles of a Lewis path, its particular application. I note Lewis's recommendations made for the 1950s Caribbean, which we failed to follow, but which have subsequently been vindicated in Asia. A Lewis path has socio-political as well as economic contents. I therefore consider how China met the socio-political criteria and where China excelled economically in a Lewis path, which for it and other Asian countries included the particular policies that Lewis outlined in the 1950s for the Caribbean. Intermingled with my discussion on China, I consider the lessons for the Caribbean in terms of finding a Lewis path in the contemporary world. Given the pressure of time, it is not possible for me to document everything I say about Lewis. I therefore refer to my article, which has been mentioned already, which appeared in SNES. A Lewis path includes socio-political prerequisites, which must be in place if economic transformation is to be achieved. These I summarize as follows on my slide. A bold vision for a thoroughgoing transformation. Leadership would be exercised to create a new social partnership and political engagement, redefining the role of the various classes, developing new institutional and organizational frameworks to promote the rapid development of the economy. Okay. In the 1950s, Lewis outlined general principles, but he also outlined specific policies, which differed widely depending on the particular case. For example, in the specific policies he advised for Guyana were very different from those for the Caribbean. We therefore need to distinguish between Lewis's principles and the particular policies of the 1950s. His universal goal was to transform low-wage, low-productivity economies. His principles included the need to scan global and local environments from a dynamic perspective, the need to make the best use of available local resources and international partnerships, the need to revolutionize domestic food production, producing agriculture, raise the local rate of savings and investment, build the capacity of the state to plan, implement, and facilitate development, ensure that all local classes acquire the skills to fulfill their role in development. In the 1950s in the Caribbean, he had some specific issues in relation to finding opportunities for surplus labor, building capacity to export goods, manufactured goods, and to develop centralized industrial estates for light manufacture. Now, I always start with my main conclusions so that you know what I have to say, in case I don't get to say it. Okay, so based on the foregoing description of the Lewis Path, I draw conclusions, which appear on this slide. China excelled on a Lewis economic path, a path outlined for the Caribbean in the 1950s. China's most hated policies in the West are exactly those that distinguish a Lewis path. China did not adopt Lewis's preferred political system, yet China met the political criteria for a Lewis path. A Caribbean Lewis economic path is not the 1950s path, yet Lewis's path-finding methods
I don't mind this number, I don't mind that we have
useful.
I don't mind, you know,
Lewis's path
colleagues, you know, in more
has
now way.
socioeconomic and techno-economic elements, which are key ones. So, which are the key ones vary within each Caribbean country. Based on a scan of the global opportunities for the Caribbean, each Caribbean country can still find a Lewis path to rapid development. I need to clarify, by techno-economic, I mean the technical relations, like the relative size of the government's budget to the country's national income, whereas socioeconomic refer to things like the different way in which groups in society relate to each other and to the whole system. Look, mainstream economists tend to focus only on the techno-economic, whereas political economists like Lewis take into account the socioeconomic. In terms of Lewis's own politics, he was a social democrat, and he favored a much more liberal regime than existed in any of the Asian countries which adopted his economic path of transition. Nevertheless, Lewis was clear that it was possible to achieve rapid economic transition under different types of regimes, so long as the regime exhibited certain features. I say that China eventually met the political criteria. The reason for my qualification is that there were periods within the history of China when the political regime was not conducive to rapid economic development. In terms of Lewis's criteria, which I list on my slide, there are periods during which the leadership failed, and there was a breakdown in the social consensus, cohesion, and cooperation. Outside of these periods, China has shown an increasing ability to plan, implement, and self-correct. One of the strengths of the Chinese regime, which is missing from many more liberal systems, is the ability to provide long-term policy and institutional development, which is not dependent on a short-term electoral cycle. Despite what the detractors say, the research, including that done by Western universities such as Harvard, shows that the Chinese state and government have some of the highest levels of legitimacy and mass support in the world. In addition, meritocracy and service are highly valued despite ongoing challenges in areas such as corruption. Change. Countries in the Caribbean, such as Jamaica, do not currently meet the prerequisites for a Lewis path and will not get there shortly. Sorry, I said overnight. This is why we need to get onto an upward spiral in terms of how the state and society perform. The experience of Asia also shows that economic development is most successful where the state has a strong capacity in planning and implementation. At the same time, no matter the competence of the state, it must be legitimate in the eyes of the people, and there has to be consensus, cohesion, and cooperation in society. No change can come if citizens are cynical that nothing can happen or change. We need to raise expectations, which will require increases in accountability and transparency. Many people in the Caribbean are despondent regarding any possibility of change. I therefore present a graph to show that there has been positive change in the Jamaican political system. The graph tracks along that line, which you see goes up to a peak, the percentage of boxes, listen carefully, in which the winner, these are electoral boxes, got all the votes counted in that box. This is a very Jamaican phenomenon, which involves either the homogenization of communities or electoral manipulation, or both. The parish of Kingston, which is a subset of the capital of the city of Kingston, has the worst case. Things got so bad in 1993 that the winner in the box was taking 100% of the votes counted in that box in nearly 50% of the boxes. The reform in the Jamaican electoral system has produced positive results, which is illustrated by the downward trend there in 2007. And generally speaking, it has continued in that direction. So change can happen, Trevor. It is important to find solutions that can work in particular countries. The Electoral Commission is a Jamaican solution that has worked. This is because it takes into account the important realities of the Jamaican political system. It recognizes the centrality of the two-party politics in our country, so that the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition are both entitled to nominate 2 electoral commissions. It utilizes the non-partisan head of state, who selects 4 commissioners. These selected commissioners are service-oriented national leaders from various sectors. The selected commissioners choose the chair and the commission from their number. The 8 commissioners choose the director of the elections. This approach has replaced ministerial responsibility for elections, has built legitimacy, and represents an all too rare occasion for consensus and cooperation between the 2 political parties in Jamaica. It has also raised expectations, accountability, and transparency. Based on the successes of the Electoral Commission, I suggest that what we need in terms of constitutional reform is the strengthening of the power of the head of state. I believe what we need is a consensus president empowered to build legitimacy. Given the 2-party current reality, there's no value in a competitively elective president in Jamaica. A president nominated with a majority in both houses voting separately that ensures that one party cannot choose the president is what we need. The consensus president would then appoint the central bodies in the state, which are now appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister after consultation with the leader of the opposition. That is the Services Commission, the Public Services Commission, the Judicial Services Commission, the Police Services Commission. In this way, there would be greater legitimacy for those officers appointed in the public sector. The president could also be empowered to appoint consensus-building national commissions after consultation with the leader of the opposition and the prime minister, but in a new formula, which I think the Constitution should adopt. That is after significant effort to seek consensus. Because after consultation has been determined by the judiciary to mean you just have to inform the person and give them a chance to reply to you. You don't have to bother what they say. Okay, next slide, please. I have other suggestions, but we don't have time for those, and I don't want to be distracted. Nevertheless, there is one important area that I need to mention. Now, I know that the government has said they're going to build a new tax office in Crossroads, so this is not really about the tax office in Crossroads. It's about respect for the Jamaican people by the state. The other day, I passed by the office in Crossroads, and I was offended by what I saw. I'm sorry I didn't take a picture, but the two pictures give an idea as to the disrespect shown by the state towards its citizens. On the left side there, those people are not sufferers from a natural hazard. Those are not people who are homeless after a hurricane. Those people are trying to pay taxes to the government. And that picture from 2013 better represents what Crossroads looked like when I saw it. Now, what's the problem? In 2013, when they build a new tax office, after building a new tax office, the problem has reoccurred. If we want to get on a Lewis path, we don't only have to improve what happens within the planning bodies of the state, we need to transform the relationship between the state and the people. Change, please. I highlight now how China excelled on a Lewis path. I'm hoping through highlighting this, we'll better also understand the Lewis path and what the Caribbean needs to do. China envisaged the country at its full potential. It scanned the local and foreign environment, planned with a system-wide scope, utilized its resources effectively, implemented on a grand scale, managed the foreign capitalists who invested in its country, and grew the national business classes. Slide, please. Although other Asian countries followed the Lewis path, China represents Lewis on a grand scale. In 1990, the Chinese leadership under Deng Xiaoping decided that the area across the river from Shanghai's main business district should become a global financial center. At that time, Pudong, shown at the top left, had very few buildings of significant height. It was a district where the poor crowded into cramped housing. In 2018, 28 years later, the tallest building you see at the top right has 128 stories, and the one next to it has 111 stories. That's 28 years. In 1950s, Louis suggests that the Caribbean transform itself by building the kinds of industrial parks that he witnessed in England. Following a Lewis path, China not only built industrial parks, but entire new cities and new areas in old cities, with Pudong being an example of the latter. When the global minority economist, Milton Friedman, sitting at the right, visited Pudong shortly after its development began, he echoed the views of the Western elite that this was a political stunt and labeled it a sham. Well, who will we follow? In seeking a Lewis path in the contemporary world, the Caribbean, like Lewis, needs to move beyond the economics of the global minority. The Caribbean needs to excel where China excelled. But there are other elements which need consideration. We need to recognize the peculiarities of our economies, build economic scale and scope with networks, extend our reach via culture, tourism, and the diaspora, understand real costs versus money illusions, and improve social provisioning and social investment. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go into all of these, but I will give a few examples. Slide. A peculiarity of the Caribbean is that our people are on the move. And more than 1 in 5 people born in the Caribbean region now live abroad. For some countries, it is much higher. In Dominica, more people live abroad who are born in Dominica than now live in Dominica. And that's not due to the volcano in Montserrat, where 80% of the people born in Montserrat now live abroad. Jamaica is about 30%. Slide, please. Yes, slide, yes. Because of migration, remittances are significant for some countries. Indeed, Jamaica is a remittant dependence country. In the year 2022, remittances represented 1/5 of the value of Jamaica's GDP. Slide. Caribbean economies exhibit other peculiarities. Generally, they are small island economies and large ocean economies because their ocean territory is much bigger than their land territory. Some are crime-dependent economies. That is, foreign exchange receipts from the drug trade and scamming represent a large portion for those countries. And frequently, where they are not crime-dependent as a whole, a significant number of communities in the country are crime-dependent. The other thing is that many are highly indebted. China effectively scanned local and foreign environments. An example of this relates to finance I have shown. China recognized that as it developed, it would suit it to have a financial center and not just depend on New York, London, or even Hong Kong and Singapore. China planned system-wide. This involved multiple sectors and agencies that changed Pudong from a sleepy village into a global financial sector. Similar developments took place with respect to its program of industrialization. This brought China success in one industry after another, thereby ensuring that it was able to utilize its resources effectively. Slide. In doing a Lewis-type environmental scan of Jamaica, I have started by looking at some of our unique products, unique successful products. In presenting these products, I wish you to consider not only the possibilities that each one presents, but the linkages between them. Notice that in the composite picture, the reggae artist Bob Marley is playing football, and the athlete Usain Bolt is executing a popular dance move known as the gully creeper. Walker's Wood, Juicy, and Appleton are agricultural-based products. Later, I explore how they all can be linked to tourism, which is suggested here by the beach. They can also be linked to the wider world, suggested by the 2 Caribbean international icons. Lastly, the sun shining on the beach suggests an alternative energy potential. Slide. With respect to drawing from my scan of Jamaican products, I note that from the 1950s, Louis saw revolutionizing the agricultural sector as the key to development. In this, we have failed. Nevertheless, there are many contemporary opportunities, but they require planning now, as he suggested long ago. Only an efficient state agency can prevent conversion of agricultural lands to housing. Similarly, only such an agency can establish a social partnership to determine the uses appropriate for each type of land. For example, Should Jamaica learn to grow sugar again? Or should we continue to import molasses from Brazil to make rum? What type of food should we grow to eat locally? And what lands are suitable for supplying the tourist industry with food or inputs for agro-industries like waters, woods? Tourism needs a rethink. As currently configured, tourism in Jamaica contributes more to strengthening foreign and certain local brands than to the economy as a whole. Instead, it could create important linkages with agriculture and other sectors well beyond having farmers supply food to the hotels. The Caribbean is a cultural superpower. The Caribbean also has a large diaspora. The Caribbean interacts with vast numbers of people from other countries via the tourist industry. We need to take a systemic approach in planning to take advantage of these realities. Every tourist that comes to Jamaica should get an opportunity to be Jamaicanized. On returning home, the tourists, together with the diaspora, would provide a platform for Jamaican exports. Produce products like Walker's Wood spices, juicy patties, apple turron, and medical music would be purchased by these persons and could be spread into their host communities from them being made available to the diaspora and or Jamaicanized tourists. Exposure to these products abroad could create a feedback loop in terms of persons who experience Jamaican products wishing to visit as tourists. Meanwhile, the tourist product, that is the Jamaican tourism product, could further be transformed to be more culturally and community-based. In a further link, tourist facilities with their large surface area roofs are candidates for the generation of solar power. I wish to spend a bit of time on franchising as an example of what Caribbean could do better. This is because Caribbean has some great products, but is far behind where it should be. Due to my limited research, some of my details may not be 100% accurate, but the trends are clear. Within the Caribbean, it seems that Rituals Coffee House and associated local brands may be the largest franchisor, with slightly more than 80 outlets. Despite this, it does not seem to be trying to move beyond the Caribbean. Meanwhile, Golden Crust, which is a Jamaican diaspora brand, appears to have the largest operation in the USA with 125 plus franchises. While this is a start, it pales against the vast number of franchises in the Caribbean from US companies. Given the size of foreign markets, notably the US and China, we should be doing much better than this. Without an effective state capacity to promote such developments, this is unlikely to take place. Slide. Looking at some of the biggest franchises in the world, we see two things: the size of the markets and the fact that despite a late start, China has moved far ahead of Canada and the UK, which are the only other two contenders in the world after the USA, which invented fast food many decades ago. In terms of outlets, not sales, a company, Mitsu, if I pronounce it correctly, who we have never heard of, a Chinese ice cream and tea, a strange combination, holds a spot for the most franchises in the world. More than 45,000 franchises, with most of them in China and a smaller number in the Asia Pacific, a few outside. Mitsu is just ahead of the original McDonald's. Slide. Bridget's sandals is another good product. From the limited information online, it seems that they are sold in only a few outlets, and there is ambiguity in their mission statement as to whether the goal is to make Bridget's sandals, or Bridget's as we call it, Bridget's, global or just Caribbean and diaspora. The historical British shoe brand Clarks is iconic in Jamaica. Clarks are now made primarily in Asia, and the company is now Chinese-owned, although still headquartered in Britain. If Jamaicans wear British shoes made in Asia, why shouldn't the world's people wear Jamaican shoes also made in Asia? The question for Caribbean manufacturers of special products is do they wish to manufacture for a Caribbean market or design for a global market? In addition, is Bridget's intellectual property protected, or is someone already making knockoffs, as here happens in Jamaica? When you see a girlfriend with a shoe, you ask her, what do you ask her? Is that a Bridget's or a Budget's? From the Jamaican point of view, it would be ideal if Bridget would keep the local manufacturing team for prototype production, custom-made one-offs for celebrities, and shoes for those willing to pay the high price for the privilege of wearing handcrafted items. Nevertheless, but the big money is in the global market, which would require a manufacturing partner, most probably from Asia. The Asian team would need to work on automation and artificial intelligence, because bearing in mind that nearly all mass-produced products will shortly be produced by robots using artificial intelligence. All of this is Bridget's choice. Yet it leaves the Caribbean with a problem. If its private business class don't enter the big times, and if the Caribbean has no appetite to build an effective state capitalist sector, as China has effectively done, then the Caribbean will be playing in the small league, and its people will face more limited horizons. Caribbean producers who wish to go to the next level need the assistance of state agencies that are yet to be created. Slide. Aside from the fact that Lewis's position on direct foreign investment has been widely misrepresented, the subject is sufficiently important that I just explore his views on the matter as I come nearer to the close of my presentation. Within mainstream economics, there's a myth that foreign direct investment is the key to developer economies. Lewis had a very different view. Cross-border investments are important, but let us consider what Lewis said in 1953 about managing the relationships with foreign capitalists. I read his words. The foreign capitalist's most useful contribution is not his capital, but the new techniques he brings. The role of the foreign capitalist is tutor from dependence on whom one wishes to escape at the earliest possible moment, as China is now doing. And here is what they hate about China. Foreign businesses should not be allowed into the country unless they play their part in training people to do their job. What we have done in the Caribbean is we have passively allowed foreign capitalists in the country, and we have learned nothing or very little from them. The USA and Western Europe generally feel that they have a right to rule the world and live at a higher standard of living than the rest of the majority. They want the rest of the world to accept foreign investment and get nothing in return but low wages earned by the workers and damage done to the environment. China said, if you want to make profits from our vast market, you have to share your know-how. The test of successful policy towards foreign investment is not how rapidly the economy grows, but how quickly you can grow the economy for yourself. Slide. Again, reading Lewis. The crucial test of industrialization policy is not how it increases employment or output, but how rapidly it builds up local enterprise. There are simply not enough foreigners available to initiate all the development possible. There are two lessons here. The Caribbean has ridden multiple cycles of booms. In Jamaica, these included sugar, bananas, and bauxite, and now remittances. During these booms, and we might add drugs as well, during the booms, if the capacity to innovate remains under development, then the bust cycle follows. The second lesson is that foreign capital is only interested in certain types of exploitation. The country needs local enterprise to fulfill its multiple needs. This brings us to the other side, which Lewis saw essential to development, and I read his words. Behind the central problem in economic development, rapid capital accumulation, including knowledge and skill with capital, lies the problem of the emergence of a capitalist class. That is to say, a group who think in terms of investing capital productively. Most countries begin by importing capitalists. Many are growing a class of state capitalists who are determined to create capital rapidly in the public sector. He says on the public account, but that can be misunderstood in our country. Slide. Pictured from the left is Jamaican Sincere, who has a Korean father. Her hit single, Hit and Run, featuring Masika and the Genius, has over 112 million views on YouTube. Next is Lisa, the K-pop, K for Korean, idol from Thailand. Her single, Money, has over 1 billion views on YouTube. Third is the Jamaican Sister Mary Ignatius Davis. I don't know how many views she has, but she could be partially credited with those of Don Drummond, the Scatolites, and the many others whom she taught at Alpha Boys School. You may wonder what this all has to do with Lewis. Lewis believed in education, training, and learning by doing. As he suggested, China sent many people abroad and invited in people who could train up local talent. In the Caribbean, we need, in many sectors, to do better in terms of understanding that success is not about raw talent and determination. As Lewis complained in his comment on a Jamaican plan in the 1940s, there's no mention of training the people who must run the show. We need more institutions like Alpha Boys School. And I'm not just talking about music. Sincere may well have more talent and natural appeal than Lisa. But Lisa became a K-pop trainee from age 14. Without endorsing the K-pop system, I note that she would have studied music, dance, and languages, acquiring fluency in Korean and English, as well as a basic knowledge of Chinese and Japanese. Her multilingualism is typical of a K-pop idol, as it is part of their training to be able to sing without any hint of not being a natural speaker in the language in which they are singing, as well as it is seen as important in terms of how they interact with their fans from the appropriate language group. As Wallace said, development requires multiple capacities. In keeping with my prior slide, and I note that this is essential to a Lewis path, but time does not allow me to elaborate on these. Slide. I hope that we can have a discussion on some of the points of greatest interest to you during the question and answer period. Thank you. I want you to help me give Mark another round of applause. It's been quite a wide-ranging discussion, and I understand that this session is being recorded, so it will be available to a wider audience. I have a few observations, but I think it's time for me to throw it out to the audience, both here and online, to ask questions. It's good if you could phrase your intervention as questions and not statements. Professor Waller, you want? No, go ahead. I was just... Yeah, do we have another mic? Okay, somebody's. Yeah, ask as many questions as you can. Bring it up front, please. Yes, here. Thanks.
You know, Mark, I was listening to the presentation, and two things. The statement you made about the franchise and the local franchise. The truth is, I have to work with some of these people when working in tourism. You know, we have this thing called Christmas in July, where we ask local artisans to come and showcase their goods and services, and then, you know, the market, the hotel and tourism market would come look at what they have and choose what items they want to put in their hotels in terms of the stores, and, you know, whether or not they want to invite them to come to the hotel or whatever products they have. And this also extends to Bridget, you know, some of the names you called. And what I found interesting is that even when you want to help them to scale, they're not interested, you know. Fear of loss of control, lack of trust in the persons who are involved in the scaling process, lack of understanding about the entire ecosystem of scaling. And they're happy to take the money from the government as long as it doesn't come with any other intervention. And this has been the case apparently for years. So we've had to try to help a number of companies in that regard, and I suspect that is one of the reasons why even in the private sector, when we talk about accelerators and incubators, that's why we don't have the numbers that we actually want. And I remember a couple of years ago, UTech, they have a center over there. I'm trying to remember who. Glasgow? TIC, right. And I remember a couple of years ago, this was a similar concern that they had the capacities, they had the capabilities, they did the branding and the marketing, but not many persons were interested in scaling. There are just some persons, if it's not fixed, why break it? And they're very comfortable getting the monies that they get, insofar as it facilitates their livelihoods. And someone has actually sat with me and said this to me, that, you know, I don't want to go overseas. I said, you have a fantastic product. I could see how this product could, you know, it would be a kind of reverse linkages, and it could impact on and contribute to. And the person just told me, I'm not interested. You know, we've met persons who have franchise here in Jamaica trying to tell them to expand overseas, and the first thing they're going to say is that Once I do that, I'm going to lose control of the product. I'm going to lose control of the space itself. So there are many different other variables that I think, as a part of your conversation, that you could incorporate in the analysis itself.
Recording
as a variable that contributes to that particular outcome. So it's just a suggestion I'm saying to you as it relates to variables that you can look at when you kind of do a deep dive into the different factors that contribute to why we're not scaling. And I had a second thing about AI, but I think I can just stop here with this one. All right?
Okay. So now the question.
Recording in progress.
Several. I come to you. Tweets.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was very stimulating. I have one question. There have been increasing critiques of this model of development from from scholars who are interested in degrowth economies, and also from indigenous scholars. Indigenous people all over the Americas have said, many of them have said unequivocally, they don't want to follow the growth model because it will disturb their relationship with nature, and they want to keep the way in which they have been able to have the form of life that they've created. What is your response to that and to those critiques?
Maybe take another one. It's the tweets, I think. It's funny tweets.
I don't need a microphone.
Okay. We're recording the session. It would help.
Would Mark give his reflections on the appropriate synergies between the local financial sector and the state sector in scaling up the kind of development that Louis projected?
Okay, you want to go ahead? Okay.
This is a bit unrelated. This is about the bit that you said on constitutional reform. I found it interesting. So, of course, if the state is to have a leading role, the constitution of that state is important. You made the point, or at least I got from what you were saying, that the two-party system we have now is intractable. And then you connected this to your suggestion of having a consensus president, as it were, from a vote in the parliament, 2/3 vote in both. So I want to know why you say the two-party system is intractable and why this justifies the election of a president within parliament rather than throughout the electorate.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My question is, what is the role for, I suppose, more democratic forms of social organization outside of private sector, corporate, and the state in any development path that the Caribbean can take? Because I know that industrialization is important, but it can be alienating, it can have its downsides. So in terms of ordinary people working in it, how can we incorporate something unique that's more democratic at the firm level in our development path?
Thank you, Mark. So I have a question about the Japanese embassy funding persons in Jamaica to go to Japan to learn about education of persons with disabilities, to come back to Jamaica to grow the skills of local Jamaican teachers and persons here. And can you just talk to that, how it fits in to the Lewis path that you talked about, growing the skill set of local persons if you're going to invite foreigners in? I know the embassy is not a business, but still, if you could just talk to that a little bit.
Okay, thank you for all those questions and comments. What you're saying, I thought I covered it in the talk, is that there are two issues that you raise. One is trust, and the other is horizon, right? Like you, I have spoken to people and say you have a very good product, when you're going to start expanding it? And they say, that's not on my horizon, right? And as I say, it's Bridget's choice, it's not my choice. And Bridget is doing better than me. I haven't employed one productive worker in my life, so who am I to criticize Bridget? I haven't exported even a patty, you know what I mean? So, you know, they're doing better than me. But the point I'm making is, if our private business people are not willing to scale up, right? And we don't believe that the state should do it, no problem. We just stay as poor as we are. So, or, you know, or as rich as we are, whichever way you look at it. The next point is that until we generate trust, and at the beginning of the thing, I asked the DJ to play some Jamaican music. I gave him a playlist. How many songs I gave you, sir? It's a genre. We call it bad mind music, right? And it would be good if we played a few now, but we won't go there, right? What you said, Richard? 13 songs, which basically are saying you can't trust people, right? As a recent one, which I don't think I gave, you don't know who your brother is, and all of this kind of music, right? But the lack of trust is deep in our society. And as I said, how can you expect people to trust a state which makes you line up like that to pay your taxes, right? I'm saying that the relationship between the state is one, and the people is not one that is going to win trust. But I think that even within that, where I think there is a possibility, and you are in the tourism, so you may know. I mean, if Juicy is now trying to break into the US market, Juicy has, again, I don't know if I have the right statistics, I only see 4 franchises in Florida, South Florida. But Juicy wants to break into the US, right? The question is, my proposal is there should be a Juicy kiosk in every hotel in Jamaica, right? And every hotel should be serving Juicy patties. Yeah. No, Juicy, because why am I advocating for Juicy? And let me clarify, neither China or Juicy has paid me for this. Nor Walker's Woods, nor Appleton, right? But Tasty, which should be the front runner, which started in 1966, has declared on their website, we are not interested in franchising in the moment. If you want to put rituals coffee shops in your hotels, I support that too. Right? At least they're franchising in the Caribbean. Right? But the point is, you get my point, but there's a problem. So we need to work with who we can. We need to build trust, and we need to try and get people to scale up. But you know, the world is a risky place, Walla. Clark's Shoes is now owned by the Chinese, right? Why? Because the Clark family never run their business properly, and they had to be bailed out by a Hong Kong company. And then the Hong Kong company, which is, you know, one of these funds, sell it to a Chinese company. So there you go. And now coming back to your question, since you asked the hardest one, the role of democratic forms. Again, I didn't touch on it strongly, but what I said is that in a country like ours, which is different from China, which has this automatic scale, right? One of the ways we need to build scale is through establishing networks, right? So you want to find a way of networking what you call more democratic enterprises. And that is the way that I see it, which requires a state sector, but it requires a different form than the ones that I was speaking to. So I'm glad you raised that point, which I didn't have time to develop in the thing. Mary, you asked about the Japanese and so forth. I'm saying that essential to our development is foreign partnerships, but it must be good foreign partnerships. Now, you are the one who would have to tell me whether that is a good partnership or not, because it's your field, not mine, right? But partnerships are essential to our development, so that it's about building good partnerships. There are many bad partnerships in our historical experience. On the constitutional question, why do I say the two parties are entrenched? Because me and Trevor tried for years to dislodge them. And we failed completely. And you don't know many people brighter than me and Trevor. So, and there are some other people in the room whose name I could call, but I won't. All right? The two-party system in Jamaica is deeply entrenched. Jamaica has, in the world, Trevor might know, I don't know, there are very few two-party systems that are as deeply entrenched as ours. Barbados is an example. The United States is another example. But outside of those three, I don't immediately think of others, right? So that the Jamaican people have shown that they have three choices. The JLP or the PNP are stay at home, right? And they're not going for anything else. So that I'm not paid by either the PNP or the JLP today, but the fact that's the reality. I have suggestions as to how we could allow an opening for other views, but through the use of proportional representation, for example. But I don't really, because you see, if you allowed a mixed system of first past the post plus proportional representation, it solves two problems. One, you don't get the situation now where there are only 10, I think it's 10 PNP people in the House. How many? 14? But they got close. They did very badly in the election, but they didn't do that badly. Or in Britain, you have the outrageous system where the government has 2/3 majority in the House and got about 30-something% of the vote. With a mixed proportional system, you don't have to even it back to 51, but you can make it more even. In a mixed proportional system in Jamaica, if you have 60 seats, right, or a few more, then someone who gets 2% on a national vote would get a seat in the House. And this would be a possible way. But under the present system, when we're talking about consensus, we're really talking about consensus between the two parties. And the rest of us are really trying to get them to agree to a minimum consensus. It's a bit more than that, but the point is, if they don't agree, then it's going to be hard to move forward. So that's my response. Ronnie, your question about the financial sector and the government, and the role of the financial sector is important. The role of financial sector is important, for example, in providing capital, which could allow smaller people to scale, right? The stock market does that through what do they call them? IPOs and through what? What? And the junior stock exchange plays that role and so forth. But, what the financial sector are really interested in doing is giving you a loan to import a motor vehicle, a high-end motor vehicle. And it's a difficult problem because there's a problem with the financial sector. One is that the financial sector is essential in the sense for day-to-day transactions, right? That is, they are the money, right? So that they have to be viable. So that it's a very difficult question as to how do you nudge them in a certain direction without bankrupting them, right? And that I don't know that I have the competence to answer that question. All right, Honor, you've raised a very important question about growth, no growth, how do we relate to the economy? And I tell you frankly, I don't like what China did. I don't like the way they did it. I don't like how they imitated the West. I mean, I don't like, you know me, I'm a no frills kind of guy. I don't think it's a great thing that everybody can have a Gucci bag in China, but the truth is that's what the Chinese people are voting for, so that I think that it is important, and there's been some self-correction in China, which I'll discuss. It is important that we engage in this dialogue between those who feel that the economy is about just more and more artifacts, right? And to understand that the accumulation of artifacts do not make us better off. And so like at Christmas, everybody accumulates all these artifacts, which are then thrown away within a few days. So that I think that critique of the thing is very valid. And I think the other side to it, where China has done better, though, is the pollution and the environmental damage. Because on the path that they started when Deng Xiaoping started in 79, right? They nearly destroyed the water and the air and the land in many parts of the country. But it reached a point now where they say, no, this can't go on, right? That part of our wealth is our land, our water, our environment, and so forth. So that it is an ongoing debate in which we need to understand that wealth is not the accumulation of artifacts, that wealth and the good life. The good life is not about accumulation of artifacts. It's about how we relate to each other and how we relate to an environment. Unfortunately, there's a very strong view in Jamaica and in our culture, which is basically about the good life is about good money, right? And I think that's a very important intervention that you have made there. And I don't know how far the Chinese are going with it, but the only thing to say positively is that they have made an enormous correction. And I would have spoken about the problems in China, but on the problem of the environment, they have made the most rapid transition in the history of an industrializing country from dirty water to clean water, from dirty air to clean air. I can tell you a traumatic experience for me as a young person. When I was about, I don't remember, I must have been a young teen, I went to New York, right? And I looked in the Hudson River, right? And I was traumatized. Because I don't know, some of you wouldn't know it, but they have a thing called a grease trap in Jamaican history, right? Where the water used to come out of your sink and go outside the house. And you had two holes, one hole in the others, and the grease trap. When you look in the grease trap, black water. And I left Jamaica, and my house had a grease trap. And I went and looked in the Hudson River. And it looked like a grease trap to me, all right? And I've been to New York recently, but I understand they have fish swimming in the Hudson River now. And that's wonderful. Great transformation. Similarly, when I went to New York and I looked down the road, I couldn't see, right? The air was dirty. When I was a little boy in London, I used to go to school as a short little boy. I used to go to school, and I couldn't see my feet when I was walking along because of the fog, right? But, both in London and in New York, they have cleaned up their act. So it's positive. And now China is cleaning up their act. But I agree, it needs to go beyond that to say it. And interestingly, I was looking at what are the main problems people say in countries. They asked this survey What are the top 3 things
Recording
you see
in
as a
progress.
problem? And this was done. The last one I saw in China was like about 2020 or something like that. The company that does it has stopped including China in the reports because China looks too good, right? Because they ask people, do you think your country is going in the right direction or wrong direction? China comes out, 95% of the people say right direction and 5% wrong direction, right? The next competitor says, 56% right direction and 34%. So they drop China. Saudi Arabia was like China, so them drop Saudi Arabia, right? Because, it looked too good. Anyway, but it was interesting. The top problem that Chinese people reported was moral decline. Right? Something like 35% of the people said moral decline, which I found was very interesting. In other words, obviously there's a feeling there that, we are losing something in society. So those are my responses. I can just take the questions. Yeah, sorry, Paget. Paget.
Would you describe a process or a specific mechanism if Jamaica were to have an epiphany, we're moving on a month, and you want to pull all this thing into a growth strategy, what would be the specific process and or model that you would employ starting the day after?
Okay.
Thank you. I think there was a question asked earlier about skills and immigration, so I'm going to tap into that. So we have a high rate of outward immigration, as you said, across the region. And I was just wondering what would Lewis's response be to that as a policy development issue? How would he try to address that currently? And this is within the context of Lewis and members of the Plantation School actually arguing against movement of people within the context of the early days of CARICOM. So I'm just putting that as the background to the question.
Wesley?
Thank you. Congratulations, Mark. Just to say, I am suffering at home because I've been listening to K-pop nonstop since my daughter came for Christmas. To BTU, Blackpink, 2 a.m., the whole shebang.
Yes.
So,
well, you know that Lisa is a member of Blackpink.
Oh, I was not. Oh, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry about that. On the China model, which I think is important for us to consider, the notion of corruption. China used to be one of the most corrupt societies on earth. And the leadership decided to accept that this is a fact and work with it, so to speak. So they adopted the corrupt Chinese businessmen and said to them, we want to use you as an example. You want to grow, but you'll have to give up your corruption. We're not going to put you in jail. We're going to work with you to grow, the external to export. So it was an acceptance that a strategy which was designed purely to suppress corruption was not going to work. It was a strategy designed to incorporate so-called corrupt businessmen. How relevant would you think that is for Jamaica? The second point is the role of R&D, research and development and technology development in the growth of the Chinese economy. We do not have an ecosystem that encourages R&D integrated through the universities and other research institutions, driving private sector cooperation, etc. I do not see that as being present in our currently. And the third thing was the role of local government. Most people focus on the Deng and central government, but most of the drivers for growth and development in China over the last 30 years came from local or state provinces, not the central government that simply gives general directions and overall policy guidelines. But it was competition among the provinces for investment, for trade, for growth and development. Do you think we have the strategy, and by strategy I mean clearly defined national goals with the capabilities, a goal and an objective without the capability is simply a dream if we do not have the capacity to execute and to carry it through. Do we have that?
In the front here.
Thank you. So, Mark, it appears to me that you're advocating that there's a path for the implementation of the Lewis model in 2025, but it appears that you would have missed something fundamental, which are the preconditions for the application of a Lewis model, if it can be done. And the first part of the preconditions has to do with the quality of the labor force. For you to have the kind of success that you advocate about China from the Lewis model, I don't think you can do it with a labor force that has only 20% of its people moving to post-secondary education. And then the second aspect has to do with the selection of the firms that are participating in this kind of industrialization. The fact is that the majority of firms that you have are what we call rent-seeking or barely just looking for a market to sell their products. Those firms are not going to do the things that you advocated, which is the improvement in the technology, improvement in the skill level, helping small firms to scale, etc. So you really have to look at the quality firms that you're going to actually target to participate in this. And the final point has to do in where exactly in the value chain the firms are going to participate as well. If you're going to move your economy, an economy like Jamaica, forward, the truth is that you have to start doing value added. But doing value added, you have to select where in the value chain you're going to play. Are you going to play at the research and development aspect? Are you going to play at the distribution aspect? Are you going to play at the packaging aspect? All of that needs to be sorted out. So for the Lewis model to really be applicable in 2025, the truth is that these preconditions really need to be there. So I would love to hear you on how you can adapt the model to get these preconditions working.
Thank you for your presentation. I found it quite interesting. I just want to revisit the question surrounding the financing element of things, specifically from the perspective of agency and power. There has been quite a bit of changes in the global financial governance system, certainly from the point at which Lewis wrote and when China embarked on its economic transformation to now. And that evolution in the financial governance system has effectively constrained the range of financing policies that local financial institutions can pursue, particularly in the context of a small open economy as compared to a fairly huge behemoth such as China. And I'll just give you a practical example of what I mean to hear your thoughts about it. So in the 1980s, we had the first Basel I convention, or a set of capital rules that financial institutions must abide by in terms of when they're advancing credit or loans to borrowers. And we are on the verge of Basel III at this point again, which are actually imposing stricter capital rules on financial institutions. The interesting thing to note about Basel I is that it was introduced by about 10 developed nations. We here in the global south did not have a seat at the table, but it became binding on us. China can, quote unquote, flout those rules, not so much us. We saw what happened after the 2007-2008 crisis. These new capital rules were introduced, and the correspondent banks pretty much vacated the region. So it is a question of agency and power. What is applicable to China versus us, given the raft of changes that we have seen in the global financial architecture, particularly from the perspective of governance?
Mark, I don't know if you could take, or you're overburdened.
No,
okay, there's a question from an online participant, Mr. Garfield Barnwell.
Mike.
Yeah, sorry. There's a question from an online participant, Mr. Garfield Barnwell. He asked, is there a role for joint regional production in advancing the industrial development of the region? Suppose the role of CARICOM in production.
All right, let's start with that one. Oh, there are a couple more questions. Well, let's have Mr. Curtin. Can he get the mic? They recording, though, you know, Kurt. All right, let's hear. You go first. You go first. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yes. Currently, it's been reported that between 2/3 and 70% of our workforce have not completed an accredited school-leaving level of education. My question is, when Lewis was formulating his thinking and developing his policies, would he have assumed that his model could be effective with that low level of education? And can any model, whether it be his or any others, be successfully implemented with that situation?
Okay. Can we get the mic back to Mr. Curtin? Yeah, Kurt.
Two things. First of all, sectoral question. Sectoral question. I mean, I came after you have begun, and you may have touched on it, but how important in the Lewis model and its application in China versus the relevance in the Caribbean is the role of the agricultural sector in the whole development process? That's one. And secondly, the question of regional economic integration. How important was that with respect to Lewis and also the Chinese experience, and what can we learn from this experience?
Okay. There's one thing I need to clarify. Despite my efforts, people keep talking about the Lewis model as if it is a set of prescriptions, right? The Lewis model is not a set of prescriptions, as I am discussing it here, the Lewis path, as I call it. Yes, Lewis outlined a model in the 1950s, or a path in the 1950s, for the West Indies, as he called it, which he saw would be applicable for labor surplus economies at that time, which would have included India and Egypt, right? Lewis outlined a completely different path for Ghana, right? And he didn't see what he was saying about West Indies as applicable to South America or Africa, right? So we must get away from the notion in discussing what I am discussing here, that it's a set of prescriptions. I'm not talking about industrialization either, which Lewis saw as important in the 1950s for the Caribbean. Why did he see it important? And this gets to what you're asking too, Clement. He saw it as very important for the transformation of agriculture. Basically, he said, there are too many people in agriculture. You cannot have half-acre farms and give people a decent standard of living. So you have to find something else for the people to do. And at that time, he suggested it was industrialization was the appropriate. In today's Caribbean, the old model or set of prescriptions, better word, can't work because the idea was that it was based on the fact that Caribbean was a very low-wage economy, right? But when you talk about low-wage economies now, the Caribbean is not performing very on the low-wage side if you're comparing with Bangladesh, right? So that I want us to get away from this model thing, right? The other thing is, I don't particularly want to go back. I want to go forward. So I could detail everything about Lewis in the past, but I want to go forward, right? Now, why did Lewis see it was so important to transform agriculture, right? Because he saw basically that what was the last alternative for anybody to do? In other words, what was your last resort? Your last resort was to go back to the family farm and eke out a living on the hills in Portland or St. Mary, right? And so long as you could get people at that low level of living, then you could employ them for nothing. And therefore, it don't matter what you're producing, you're going to have a low-wage, low-productive economy, right? So what we're talking about is finding a way of transforming ourselves from a low-wage, low-productive economy into a high-wage, high-productive economy. That is the Lewis path that I am talking about. And you're doing it based on what are your possibilities and what are the possibilities in the world today. All right. So in relation to the regional integration and Garfield's question about joint production and so forth, I say international partners are essential for our development. And in our international partners, I include, of course, our regional partners. And in many ways, they are very important and they provide opportunities. So, for example, Rituals could learn to franchise by franchising throughout the Caribbean, although I don't know why they haven't been successful in Jamaicans, but you know, Jamaicans and Trinidadians have a little issue there. I don't know. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I'm not pushing it. But the region gives us a larger platform on which to take on the world. So that Lewis also had a saying, which is economics speak. He said you must use everything up to its marginal advantage, right? So it's not international or regional. It's not agriculture or industry, right? It's not tourism or manufacturing. It's really you want to use everything up to the point where you can push everything as far as it can go. So that regionalism has many possibilities and many opportunities. And certainly, as Claremont, you would know, we have not taken advantage of our regional possibilities. And Lewis was a regionalist. Lewis was your kind of regionalist. Lewis was fighting for a return of the Federation up to his last days, you know. So he was a regionalist, and he understood the value of regionalism. And many people don't understand the continued value of regionalism. Many people don't understand how important regionalism is today because of the functional cooperation in which we participate. Things like meteorology, CXC, and various other things, UWI, my principal would remind us, and so forth, right? So that I put that. In terms of agriculture, Lewis saw agriculture was fundamental, but he has been misrepresented as an advocate of industrialization. But whether it was in land-rich Ghana or land-poor Caribbean, agriculture was his focus. All right, so what am I saying about where we are on a Lewis path? We can't move towards a Lewis path with anybody but the people we have, right? So we would like a more educated labor force. We would like more ambitious capitalists. We would like less corrupt people and all of that. But the question is, how do you build a virtuous cycle in the current circumstances, right? So yes, right now, I discussed remote working. And I'm sorry Wale is gone, because one of the questions we need to ask too is what kind of work is going to be left? Okay, I see my brother there, he's a doctor. The Chinese are about to put online an AI hospital, right? I don't know how many have heard of it. It is already functional, right? AI agents are superior to human doctors, right? If you take a radiologist or a radiographer who is not a doctor, AIs can read, what do you call them? X-rays and MRIs better than humans, right? China is about to put online this AI hospital. And each AI agent can treat 10,000, I draw the number out of my head, patients in a week. How many can a human doctor treat? Right? So that the question is, what remains as work? Okay. Now just to give you my pet peeve, Jamaica's education is a joke, right? And I always ask my audience, what are the two biggest prizes in Jamaican education? What can students get a big prize for succeeding at in Jamaica? What's the biggest one? Say it out loud. I don't think sports is the biggest one. You get to go on TV. Schools Challenge Quiz. And what's the next one, which Gleena has been fostering for years? I mean, what a joke. What a shame, what a disgrace that we take our brightest students and train them to memorize things. What we should have is AI competitions for School Challenge. You know, you have ChatGPT playing against somebody else, right? It's a disgrace, right? What we should have students doing is learning to program, learning to write code. What we want is coding competitions. What we want students to learn to write apps and robotics, right? And if they're going to have challenge quizzes, it's not for them to have it in the head. It's that each student is there with a terminal, and you ask them a question, and they have to find the answer from the AI as quickly as possible, right? So that just shows you that we are wasting our time, right? So that yes, our education needs revamping and so forth. Okay, we have a lot of questions. The problems of small open economies and the rules of credit. There's only one good thing now, you know, is that we're moving towards a multipolar world. And the time will short be when you don't need a US corresponding bank to do transactions in the world, right? So that the days when the G7 countries could bully the rest of the world are coming to an end, right? When the G7 was established, it was twice the size of the 7 largest emerging economies. In 2016, the 7 largest economies, emerging economies, are the same size as the G7. In 2050, the 7 largest emerging economies will be twice the size as the G7. So who will be bullying who at that time? So that, yes, but Jamaica and the Caribbean has a particular problem. All our ties are with the dying hegemons, right? So what is the position? What is the position of Panama, right? In the Caribbean. We're under the bottom of the United States. Jamaica's ties, most of our migrants are in China. In United States. Most of our our tourists come from the United States. Our remittance is coming from the United States. So we are in a difficult situation. But as you say in Jamaica, you have to take time, draw your hand out a lion mouth, you know? So that's how I would do that. So it's not just China flouting the rules, but the BRICS countries, and the BRICS countries now have the majority of the world's people. So that there are changes taking place. The value chain, I thought I made the point about the value chain, because what I'm saying is Bridget needs to move from manufacturing shoes, right, to designing shoes. Who makes the money in making Apple computers? The designers, right, and the branders, the vast majority. And somebody asked the same thing about agriculture. If you look at cocoa, Trinidad produces cocoa, right? And you look at a circle of the cocoa thing, right? The farmers get this little bit, and then the processors get this little bit, and then the traders get this little bit, and then you look on the whole other half is the confectioners, right? So that the value chain is crucial, and we need, and what Louis said is you start at the bottom of the value chain with light industries, and you climb up it. But we have to climb the value chain. I agree with you completely on that one. On education, yes. Another thing I say in terms of, I got distracted on the future of work. One of the future of work is remote working. But where are we remote working now? We are in the call centers at the lowest end. Where is India? I don't know how long they'll be there until they develop the AI. But a doctor prescribes an X-ray in New York, right? That X-ray is electronically transferred to India, right? Where the radiographers in India read it. And then in the morning, because of the time difference, in the morning, the diagnosis comes back. And that is what India has done. They're at a higher end of remote work. But the question is, where can we go in remote work? Where can we go on the value chain? It does depend on the level of education. And as we increase education, we do move up the chain. All right? I was wondering where you're going with local government there, Wesley, because, I mean, I have friends who are big on local government. I find local government a strange concept in the Caribbean. Because what's the size of a local government in China? No, but what's the size of, no, a local government in China has 21 million people. And that's one of the smaller local governments, right? So, I mean, you know, a city in India, which doesn't have as big a city as China, a city in India has the population of Jamaica, or even the Caribbean. So why are we confusing ourselves? You see, we absorb these models from abroad and try and apply. For instance, we have destroyed the health system by creating regional authorities. Now, why should Jamaica, a population of under 3 million, need to be regionalized? That is passé. I mean, even UWI, I mean, we now talk about one UWI. UWI has, I don't know, you can tell me, how many HR systems does UWI have, right? UWI should have one HR system. Yeah, but you have 5 instances. That's crazy. So that anyway. Yes, we need R&D, but it can't be generalized. You know, we talk about science and technology and so forth, but you have to nuance it in the case of the Caribbean, because we are not going to have science and technology that deals with heavy industry. We need a lot of science and technology in areas of design, computing, in AI, and in coding. Now, Jamaicans don't speak English, so it's their second language. But our third language should not be Spanish, French, even Chinese or German. It should be, what's the language called? I don't see any of my colleagues. Python, who said it? No, Python. Our third language should be Python, right? That is an open source coding language, which if you're not using it, you're not saying anything, right? So that's where children who are 4 years old in Jamaica should be learning Python. That's what they need to learn. In fact, they can speak Patois and learn Patois. Don't worry with the English, all right? The Paget, the Epiphany, right? I think the Epiphany really is about the end to tribalism, right? Jamaica needs to end tribalism. And I'm not just talking about political tribalism. So I'm not going to talk about political tribalism, a little more controversial. But you see, I have a little football match. I'm talking about a corner league, right? So me and Denzel have our corner league, right? And Denzel is playing for Angola, and I am playing for Botswana, right? And Trevor is the ref, right? And Trevor give a ruling against me. Wesley is one of my supporters. Now, I just nearly broke Paget's foot, you know, right? You know? And Trevor showed me the red card. What happens? Wesley run on the field and want to beat up Trevor, right? Now, Trevor made a proper, Wesley should congratulate Trevor, right? And say to his player, you know, you really can't behave like that, you know? And you're causing us to lose the match because of your poor conduct. No, that's not our attitude. If our party leader say foolishness, we say Ray, right? If the opposition leader say the greatest thing in the world, foolish, what kind of foolishness is that? And that is a fundamental problem in our society, I would say. So that is a prerequisite, I'm saying. Forget about the economy, you know, till you solve the socio-economic and politics. And it's not, Jamaica is a corrupt country, but it's not the politicians who are corrupt. It's not the businessmen who are corrupt. The country is corrupt. Right. The main problem Jamaicans have with corruption is what? What is our main problem with corruption? What? I never get none. I never get none. That is the reality. But that's our people. So how do you spiral out of that situation? In terms of, I was asked a question about skills, emigration, and so forth. Lewis's main thing about skills and emigration was that we need to send people abroad, but not to stay, but to come back with their skills. And you need that constant interaction. That is important. But with limited opportunities here, people go abroad. And also we need to We need to debureaucratize the CARICOM system. It's very hard to get one of these certificates of what have you, and so we talk, but we don't implement. Anyway, all of you look tired. If I was giving a lecture in school, I would say all of you start, close your book. And I know that the lecture, you know, when a lecture is over, when you're a lecturer, you know, you see the student them start close their book, you know. You think you're making the most important point for the lecture, you notice the book closed. Well, you know, it's time to go home, right? So, thank you very much. Somebody said before I leave, you get a last word, Patrick.
With all the contradictions that you've outlined, all the problems that you have, and the government tomorrow wants to drive economic growth within this broad path. And Mark is the advisor. Tomorrow, what I would love to see, what are the set of processes that Mark would be saying to the political elite, the political directorate, the bureaucratic elite, here are the things, here is how we're going to now begin whatever this process is.
Okay, so you're saying we have solved all the other problems, so we're ready to go now, we're ready to go now.
You're faced with all of the contradictions that you face now, and you need to pull out of poverty, whatever it is, by what all the various tranches that you're going to have to lift people out of the poverty, all the steps. What would you say tomorrow that you're the advisor at Jamaica House and the next person, whoever is there?
You have to build an effective business class. An effective business class, whether in the state or in the private sector. You need to build an effective business class. You need to build an effective planning system in the public sector. And you need to, as people have said, you need to train each segment of the professionals, the workers, the businesses, business people, the marketers, the public servants, the planners. You need to train them to the level of the skill they need. And they need to have the right skills, attitudes, orientations, and the ability to cooperate with each other in terms of the role that they must play in the economic development. So that's how I see it. All right.
No, we're now at closing remarks. I know there are burning questions still. Dr. Kevin Williams. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to keep my closing remarks short. Yeah, short and sweet. Any serious development course or economic growth course, the starting point is the Lewis model. Okay? But times have changed. Conditions have changed. So we have transitioned from the Lewis model. We have the Roma model. We have the Solo model. Roma won the Nobel Prize for his growth model about ideas. Ideas generate increasing return. Okay? So we have to, when we talk about moving a country forward, we have a compendium of models from which we select elements that are consistent with our local conditions. So it's not a question of you take one model and you apply it to your situation. You examine your local context and then you tailor whatever element or elements of each model that will drive your development forward. So having said that, let me say thanks to the principal, Professor Williams, for your intervention, Prof. Let me thank Dean Ricketts in her absence, PVC Bernard, the speaker, for your thoughtful and provocative presentation, the chair, Dylan. Let me thank you, the audience, for all the questions that you have generated. Thanks to the tech team, thanks to Prof. Waller in his absence, who put this thing together. Thanks to Ms. Harris, the admin lead at Salisis, and a general thank you for being here. We have cocktail following this discussion, and you can join me out there. It's downstairs. So thank you all for being here. And come back next year. This time, we'll have another round of presentation. Thank you.